So why did we pick these two Lactobacillus strains? Now, remember we did this in between 1980 and 1985, and back then, in those days, everyone thought that Lactobacillus acidophilus was the most common organism in the intestine and the vagina. And so we did look at some Lactobacillus acidophilus, and it turned out we couldn't find one that had properties that we felt would be protective for the woman and help fight infection. And it turns out that was probably a wise decision because acidophilus is not the most common organism in the vagina anyway. The second thing is, if you're going to choose the most common organism, then some would have argued in 1980-85 that it should be acidophilus, and then as we learned more about the vaginal organisms, they may have felt it should be a Lactobacillus crispatus, and now even today Lactobacillus inners is actually the most common organism. And we felt that the organism that's the most common isn't necessarily the one that you want. What you want is something that has properties that are able to help the host become healthy. So the Lactobacilli rhamnosus GR1 strain essentially was chosen because it helps fight yeast organisms. It prevents yeast from forming biofilms and multiplying, and also E. coli and what we call gram-negative bacteria, so some of the ones that are involved in bacterial vaginosis and E. coli infection. And so that was terrific. We chose that. But then we said, well, there's other organisms that can be a problem, and some of these are gram-positive, so streptococcus, enterococcus, things like that. And so we chose RC14, which turns out to be Lactobacillus reuteri RC14. Initially it was called acidophilus, then it became fermentum, because microbiology classification of bacteria has evolved over the years. The organism itself is still the same. And so now we've got a combination of one that affects the yeast and the E. coli and the other one that affects the gram-positives, and it makes it essentially a much more potent probiotic, because if you look at 10 women, in some cases the problem is more the bacterial vaginosis and the yeast and the bladder infections, and then in another case it may be more Enterococcus faecalis or the toxic shock organism Staphylococcus aureus. And so you really need to, in our case we feel you need to have the two, because there aren't such things as superbugs. Now the RC14 produces hydrogen peroxide, and hydrogen peroxide is believed to be important in protecting the host against infection. In fact, it's one of the components, it's not the only one, and we'll discuss some of these categories and properties later on.